Hello there, it's Austin. Today we're going to take some inspiration from one of my favorite franchises, The Lord of the Rings, and brew a English brown ale, or a Middle-earth brown ale. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. We'll start off by collecting some reverse osmosis water. Right about 4.8 gallons of it should do just fine. I'll be adjusting this water to match a British brown ale profile, and that means 2.5 grams of calcium chloride and 1.9 grams of both Epsom salt and gypsum. Then it's time to get into our grain choices. Before doing so, I definitely want to note that Tolkien deliberately avoided making direct connections between his fictional world and the real world, so it's not really possible to pinpoint the exact real-world location for the ingredients that might have been used in a beer in Middle-earth. But if we assume Tolkien wrote about the beer that he knew, a good first step might be focusing on the area around the Shire and Bree, overlaying a map of Europe based on real-world distances, and kind of centering it over where Tolkien lived in Birmingham. We have a pretty good idea of where to source our ingredients from. To start with the grain, the area in eastern UK, well known for producing Maris Otter pale malt, lies right along the borders of the Brandywine. If you haven't used it before, Maris Otter pale malt is a traditional English barley known for its nutty and biscuity flavor. I also added a bit of Crystal 80 malt as well as some honey malt. This grain bill hopes to evoke rich and earthy, as well as the only adjective we got from beer in the books, which is brown. With all of our grains added to the mash kettle, we'll drop the lid on and set the timer for 60 minutes. Although there aren't a ton of specifics shared about beer in The Lord of the Rings, when it is referenced, it holds great significance. It's a drink that brings people together, whether they're hobbits enjoying a pint in the Inn of the Prancing Pony, or they're orcs talking about looting over a nice grog. It's relatable, and for biased reasons, one of my favorite parts of the stories. Once our grains are removed and drained back into the kettle, then it's time to boil for 60 minutes. I'm using East Kent Golding hops for our 60-minute and 20-minute editions. In the books, they do mention spices a few times. Unfortunately, it's mainly cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and peppers. So if we head back to our overlaid map, the area of Kent in the UK, where East Kent Goldings come from, lines up pretty well with the rest of our wild assumptions. With our boil concluded, it's time to start chilling down the wort. Out of solidarity with my fellow Middle-earth brewers, I'll skip the pump and manually stir during the chilling process. But that's pretty much where the solidarity ends, because it's time to transfer from my electric kettle to my stainless fermenter. A quick gravity check showed we were a little lower than intended, but nothing too much to worry about. And then it's time to pitch our yeast. I'll be using Y-Yeast London ESB Ale, which today is going to stand for Extra Special Brown, I guess. Now, the nature of yeast makes it a little bit harder to pinpoint the origin of, especially compared to grain or hops, but the limited information I could find shows that we're pretty much right on target, at least according to our trusty map that Tolkien would certainly disagree with. 2 days after active fermentation has started, it's time to add in our honey. To make sure we didn't have any bugs sticking around, I did add the honey to some water and boiled it before chilling it and adding it to the fermenter. Fermentation schedule for this beer was pretty simple. I just let it ride at room temperature for a week or two. To pass the time while the yeast are finishing up, I thought I'd let Melon try on this ring that my uncle gave me. That didn't go too well. She disappeared, and now there are a bunch of horsemen stalking around my neighborhood. Anyways, once the final gravity of the beer had been reached and the samples we were pulling tasted pretty good, it's time to transfer over to the keg, carbonate, and then pour ourselves a pint of trusty brown ale, a beer they'll sing songs about, how brown it is. I'm not the biggest fan of brown ales. In fact, the last time I brewed one, the keg leaked pretty much across my whole kitchen, and I ended up smelling it for the next 2 years. But tying this one to one of my favorite franchises has certainly helped. This is a fun ale that I can feel myself sitting in a tavern enjoying. Who knows what Tolkien had in mind when he was writing about beer in The Lord of the Rings, but in my head it tasted like this. It's rich, malty, and biscuity coming from that Maris Otter. The hop flavor really settles in the corner of your mouth like a ranger watching some hobbits that just walked into the bar. This was a really fun beer to come up with a recipe for and jump through a bunch of mental hoops to make it work. I'm excited to share it with some of my friends that like Lord of the Rings. And who knows, maybe some stranger I share it with will end up king one day and I'll get some kickbacks from that. Cheers!